And I'm number two, which?
I'm 67 years old, been married to Linda for 14 years. She has a 34-year-old son, Marcus, from her first marriage, who has been a constant source of drama since day one of our relationship. Let me paint you a picture of Marcus. This guy is the walking embodiment of failed potential. In his 30s and has never held a steady job for more than 8 months. His resume reads like a disaster compilation. Failed food truck business that lasted 6 weeks. Cryptocurrency trading venture that lost 12 grand in 2 months. 3 separate DUI arrests. Multiple fender benders. And an endless parade of get-rich-quick schemes that somehow always requires substantial upfront investment from his mother. Every single crisis followed the same predictable pattern. Marcus would show up at our house unannounced, usually smelling like a combination of energy drinks and desperation, with some elaborate story about how this setback was temporary or how his latest brilliant idea just needed a small cash injection to take off. Linda would get that maternal glow in her eyes like she was witnessing the second coming. And before I knew it, thousands of dollars would vanish from our joint accounts. When I discovered these transactions later, Linda would get defensive and launch into speeches about how I didn't understand what it meant to truly love your child, and how Marcus just needed one more chance to prove himself. She treated every conversation about his financial irresponsibility like I was personally attacking her motherhood. The breaking point started building about 5 years ago when Linda withdrew $15,000 from our retirement savings to bail Marcus out of what she called a temporary legal misunderstanding in Las Vegas. Turned out he'd been running some amateur card-counting operation and owed money to people who weren't interested in payment plans. She didn't consult me, didn't even mention it until I noticed the withdrawal on our quarterly statement. That's when I started what I privately nicknamed Operation Clarity. A comprehensive documentation system tracking every dollar that flowed from our household to Marcus's ever-expanding list of emergencies. I'm a retired insurance investigator, so meticulous record-keeping and risk assessment are hardwired into my DNA. I began treating my marriage like a fraud case that needed evidence preservation. I opened a separate filing system in my home office, organized by date and incident type. Every bailout, every loan that was never repaid, every promise that evaporated the moment Linda's check cleared. I kept copies of bank statements, text message screenshots, email chains, even recorded phone conversations where legally permitted. Not because I was planning anything specific, but because patterns matter, and I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The nuclear moment came during last year's Thanksgiving dinner. Linda had invited what felt like half the neighborhood, her sister Karen, her entire book club, several co-workers she insisted were practically family, and some random acquaintances who apparently needed a place to celebrate. The wine was flowing freely, everyone was getting louder by the hour, and Linda was basking in the role of gracious hostess. Right in the middle of dessert service, Linda stood up with her wine glass raised like she was about to deliver a State of the Union address. The entire table quieted down, expecting some generic gratitude speech about family and friendship. "I want to propose a special toast," she announced, her cheeks flushed from the alcohol and attention. "To Marcus, my absolute pride and joy, my number one priority in this world." The room erupted in enthusiastic applause and laughter. Marcus, who was wearing a wrinkled shirt I'd paid for and a jacket that didn't match his pants, also purchased by me, grinned like he'd just won the Nobel Prize. Then someone, I think it was one of Linda's book club friends, who always reeked of jasmine perfume and cheap Chardonnay, called out with nervous laughter, "What about Thomas? Doesn't he deserve a toast too? He's been taking such good care of you both." Linda didn't miss a beat. Without even glancing in my direction, she responded loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Oh, he knows exactly where he stands. Thomas has always been my solid number 2. Always will be." She turned to Marcus with an exaggerated wink. "Some people are just naturally born to understand their proper place in the hierarchy." The table exploded with more laughter, some of it genuine amusement, some of it the uncomfortable kind people produce when they sense something awkward is happening, but don't want to kill the party mood. I sat there holding my wine glass, feeling the weight of public humiliation settle over me like a heavy blanket. The engagement ring I'd bought Linda caught the candlelight as she gestured dramatically. I managed to force a smile and said quietly, "Well, it's certainly good to know the official rankings." Nobody seemed to notice how my knuckles had gone white gripping the stem of my glass, or how I didn't take another sip of wine for the rest of the evening, or how I didn't contribute another word to any conversation after that moment. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and mechanical responses. After the pumpkin pie was served, and Linda insisted on taking group photos by the fireplace. After Marcus gave me one of his trademark fake embraces that reeked of cologne, masking something much stronger, after Linda kissed my cheek and whispered, "Don't be so sensitive, honey." It was obviously just a playful joke. I excused myself and went upstairs to my office. I sat at my desk for about 20 minutes, just staring at the wall and processing what had just happened. Then I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out Operation Clarity. I hadn't looked at it in several months, but suddenly it felt more relevant than ever. I added a new page titled Public Ranking Declaration, Thanksgiving 2023 inches, and documented every detail I could remember while it was still fresh. Then I picked up the framed photograph from the corner of my desk, the one Linda always complained about because she said it clashed with her decorating aesthetic. It showed me and my late brother David standing next to the rebuilt engine of his classic Mustang, both of us covered in grease and grinning like idiots. Just two guys who respected each other enough to spend a weekend solving problems together. David used to tell me that the loudest people in any room are usually compensating for being the emptiest. Let them make all the noise they want, he'd say. Just make sure when the show ends, you're still holding the real power. I'd never understood what he meant until that moment. The following Monday morning, while Linda was at her weekly yoga class followed by her usual gossip session at Starbucks, I drove to our credit union with a briefcase full of carefully organized documents. I'd learned long ago that the key to handling these situations was to make everything appear routine and boring. Nothing raises red flags like appearing rushed or emotional. I met with Dennis, our account manager who'd been handling our finances for the past 8 years. He greeted me with his usual friendly handshake and asked about Linda and how our holiday had gone. I gave him the standard polite responses while sliding a folder across his desk labeled Portfolio Restructuring, Routine Annual Review. Dennis opened the folder and his expression gradually shifted from casual friendliness to professional concern as he absorbed the contents. Inside were detailed contribution records for every account we shared, going back to the day we opened them. Spreadsheets showing exact dollar amounts, dates, sources of funds, and tax documentation proving that 94.7% of our combined retirement savings had come from my paychecks and investment decisions. "Thomas," Dennis said carefully, "you want to move almost $500,000 into individual accounts? That's a pretty significant restructuring." I nodded calmly. "I'm not removing anything that belongs to both of us. I'm simply segregating assets based on actual contribution records." Linda contributed $18,400 total over our entire marriage, mostly from a part-time job she held for 8 months in 2019. I'd like her portion to remain in joint accounts, but my contribution should be protected in individual retirement vehicles. Dennis spent the next hour reviewing documentation, making phone calls to compliance departments, and triple-checking legal requirements. Everything was perfectly above board. The post-nuptial agreement Linda had signed 4 years earlier when she wanted me to co-sign for that Tuscany vacation clearly stated that either party could reorganize assets based on proportional contribution records. She'd never read past the first page. She just saw the part about the Italy trip and signed wherever I put the little yellow sticky notes. I'd had the document reviewed by 3 different attorneys before presenting it to her. By noon, $467,300 was sitting in protected individual retirement accounts under my name only. Linda's $18,400 remained untouched in the original joint account. I wasn't being vindictive. She could keep every penny she'd actually earned, but I wasn't going to continue subsidizing her son's lifestyle with my life savings. 3 weeks later, Marcus showed up unannounced on a Thursday afternoon. I heard his car before I saw it. Some ridiculous modified Honda with an exhaust system loud enough to wake the dead and bass speakers that rattled our windows from 2 blocks away. He parked crooked in our driveway, taking up enough space for 2 normal vehicles. Linda rushed to greet him like he was a war hero, returning from overseas instead of her unemployed adult son coming by for another handout. They hugged dramatically while I watched from my office window, updating my daily notes with the time and circumstances of his arrival. Marcus strutted into our living room wearing ripped designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget and a t-shirt advertising some cryptocurrency that had crashed 6 months ago. His phone was constantly buzzing with notifications, and he kept glancing at the screen like he was monitoring urgent international business communications. "Tommy," he shouted when he noticed me, flashing those ridiculous finger guns he thought made him look cool. He only called me Tommy when he needed something significant. Otherwise, I was just That guy, or Linda's husband. I nodded politely without getting up from my desk. Marcus, nice to see you. He launched into his presentation like a motivational speaker hopped up on energy drinks in delusion. This time it was some elaborate scheme involving importing artisanal timepieces from a boutique supplier in Eastern Europe, then creating digital certificates of authenticity using blockchain technology. Every watch would come with its own NFT proving legitimacy and exclusivity. Linda perched on the edge of our sofa listening to this nonsense like he was explaining the cure for cancer. Her eyes were practically glowing with maternal pride and financial excitement. It's revolutionary, Marcus continued, pacing around our living room like a caged animal. We're talking about disrupting the entire luxury goods market. Physical products backed by digital scarcity. The profit margins are absolutely insane. We're looking at 500% returns in the first quarter alone. I let him finish his entire pitch before responding. That sounds very interesting, Marcus. I'd love to see your business plan. Complete financial projections, supplier contracts, legal compliance documentation, market research data. If everything checks out, I'd be happy to introduce you to 2 colleagues who specialize in investment due diligence. Marcus blinked rapidly, like I'd just asked him to solve calculus in his head. Oh, absolutely. I just need a few days to put together the formal presentation. Most of the details are still in development, but I can definitely get you a comprehensive package. Who are these colleagues? Linda asked, suddenly very interested in the logistics. Former associates from my insurance days, I replied. They've been evaluating investment opportunities for over 20 years. Very thorough, very professional. If they approve the business model, we can discuss funding levels. Marcus gave me a sloppy thumbs up and mumbled something about having everything ready within 48 hours. He left 30 minutes later, already texting someone before he reached his car. As he backed out of our driveway, I noticed he scraped the curb again with his rear bumper. I went upstairs and added a detailed entry to Operation Clarity. Marcus visit, March 15th. Cryptocurrency timepiece scheme, no documentation provided. Verbal promises of business plan within 2 days. Linda emotionally committed before reviewing any evidence. Probability of follow-through, minimal. 4 weeks passed without a word from Marcus. No business plan, no phone call, no email, not even a text message. His social media showed him partying in Miami Beach with friends who looked barely old enough to drink legally, posting pictures with captions about living the dream and manifesting abundance, while spending money he didn't have on experiences he couldn't afford. I printed several of his Instagram posts and filed them in the folder labeled Marcus Financial Responsibility Documentation. During the 4th week of silence, Linda stormed into my office carrying a cup of herbal tea and wearing the expression she reserved for serious marital confrontations. You never followed up with Marcus about his business opportunity, she announced, like she was presenting evidence in a criminal trial. Was I supposed to? I asked without looking up from the estate planning documents I was reviewing. You told him you'd connect him with your investment people. He's been waiting for you to arrange that meeting. I closed the folder and finally gave her my full attention. Linda, I told him to provide a business plan first. He promised to deliver it within 48 hours. That was 4 weeks ago. She sat down across from my desk like we were entering marriage counseling territory. You're being deliberately passive-aggressive again, Thomas. You know how hard it is for him to put together formal documents. He's more of a visionary than a paperwork person. No, I said calmly. I'm being number 2. Just like you explained to everyone at Thanksgiving dinner. The phrase hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. Linda's face went through several different expressions. Surprise, irritation, guilt, then back to defensive anger. She left my office without saying another word, muttering something under her breath about not supporting family dreams. I didn't ask if she meant Marcus's dreams or mine. We both already knew the answer. That evening, I logged into our home security system and reviewed the footage from Marcus's visit, making sure I had complete documentation of every promise and commitment he'd made. Not because I needed it immediately, but because patterns are predictable, and I knew this story wasn't finished yet. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly investment statements. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in months. Rick Morrison, an old colleague from my insurance investigation days who now worked in municipal administration. Thomas, Rick said without any preliminary small talk, you might want to check on that vehicle registered under your name. It's showing up in some police reports that crossed my desk. My stomach dropped. What kind of reports? DUI, property damage, resisting arrest. Driver listed as Marcus Chen. Vehicle registered to Thomas Chen at your address. The timeline assembled itself in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I'd been dreading to complete. 2 months earlier, Linda had asked to borrow my car because hers was getting routine maintenance. I'd handed over the keys without thinking twice about it. The car was registered and insured under my name, but I wasn't using it much since semi-retirement gave me the luxury of staying home most days. What I didn't know was that Linda had given Marcus permission to drive it whenever he needed transportation. He wasn't listed on my insurance policy and didn't even have a valid driver's license at the time, something I only discovered later when I requested his driving record out of morbid curiosity. According to Rick's information, Marcus had crashed into a parking meter outside a downtown bar, then sideswiped a bicycle rack while trying to flee the scene. When the police caught up with him 3 blocks away, he refused the breathalyzer test and became belligerent with the arresting officers. The car registration came back to my name and address. The most infuriating part was Linda's response when I confronted her. She didn't deny anything, didn't apologize, didn't even seem particularly concerned. She just shrugged and said Marcus had been helping her with errands, and the police were totally overreacting to a minor traffic incident. He wasn't authorized to drive my vehicle, I told her firmly. Thomas, he's family. Of course he's authorized. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. That's when I realized Linda wasn't covering for Marcus out of motherly loyalty. She was choosing him over basic honesty and legal responsibility. She genuinely believed that calling someone family exempted them from normal rules and consequences. I spent the next morning at my insurance company's local office, filing paperwork to revoke all permissive use of my vehicle. I signed a notarized statement specifying that Marcus Chen was never authorized to operate my car under any circumstances, and that any future use would constitute unauthorized vehicle operation under state law. The insurance representative, a middle-aged woman named Beverly, who'd been handling my policies for years, looked concerned as she processed the documentation. Most people don't take these steps unless there's been a serious incident, she said diplomatically. There has been, I replied, and I'm ensuring there won't be another one at my expense. From that point forward, if Marcus touched my car again, it would be flagged in the system as theft rather than permissive use. Any accidents or violations would fall entirely on him, with no liability spill over to me or my insurance rates. That weekend, Linda brought up the incident during breakfast, still trying to minimize the severity and make me feel like the unreasonable party. I heard you filed some kind of paperwork with the insurance company, she said, using the tone she reserved for discussing my most annoying habits. I removed unauthorized drivers from my policy, I confirmed. Standard risk management. Marcus isn't unauthorized, he's my son. He wasn't on the policy, doesn't have a valid license, and crashed my car while intoxicated. That makes him a liability, not family. Linda's face flushed red. You're being completely unreasonable about this. It was just a minor accident. These things happen. No, I said, standing up and clearing my breakfast dishes. These things happen to people who don't take precautions. I take precautions. She followed me to the kitchen sink. You're punishing him for one mistake. I'm being second, I replied, without turning around. Just like you taught me. The crisis that ended everything started with 5 missed calls in 10 minutes. Linda never called repeatedly unless someone was dead or in jail. So when I saw her name flashing on my phone screen over and over, I knew Marcus had finally crossed a line that money couldn't uncross. I was sitting in my office reviewing some consultation reports when the calls started coming in. I let them go to voicemail initially, but the persistence told me this wasn't a routine emergency. By the 5th call, I answered. Thomas, thank God, Linda sobbed into the phone. Marcus is in jail and they won't let me use the house for bail. They're saying something about the property title being changed. I don't understand. What's happening? I leaned back in my chair and waited for her to provide more details. Between the crying and hyperventilating, the story gradually emerged. Marcus had been arrested again, not just for drunk driving this time, but for threatening a police officer and claiming he had powerful political connections who would end the cop's career. Apparently, he'd told them I was some kind of state-level lobbyist with influence over municipal budgets. I'm a retired insurance investigator. Marcus had never bothered to learn what I actually did for a living. The bail amount was substantial enough that Linda had tried to use our house as collateral, only to discover that the property title had been transferred into a revocable trust 6 months earlier. Another document she'd signed without reading, thinking it was routine refinancing paperwork. I'm at the bank right now. Linda continued through her tears. They're saying the house isn't in both our names anymore. What did you do? I'm trying to help my son, and you've somehow blocked me from accessing our own property. I didn't respond immediately. I was remembering the audio recording I'd made 4 months earlier during Linda's birthday celebration with her girlfriends. They'd all had too much wine and too few boundaries, and Linda had been riding high on female validation and alcohol-induced honesty. Her friend Janet had commented that I seemed like such a sweet and stable husband. Linda had laughed and said, "Marcus is my whole world. Thomas is just the guy who handles the boring stuff and pays the bills." They'd all giggled at that assessment. I'd saved the recording not out of anger, but out of clarity. Sometimes you need to hear truth spoken casually to understand what someone really thinks of you. "Linda," I said calmly into the phone, "the house was transferred into a trust that I established before we were married. The joint title was a courtesy arrangement that I revoked after the car insurance incident. You signed the paperwork 6 months ago. I didn't know what I was signing. You told me it was about refinancing. I told you to read it before signing. You said you trusted me to handle the details." There was a long pause filled only with her breathing and background noise from the bank parking lot. "Thomas, please, this isn't the time for games. Marcus needs help. He's not thinking clearly, and this arrest could ruin everything for him. Can't you see this is about family?" That word, family, landed like a slap across my face. She'd called me family for the first time in recent memory, but only when she needed something I controlled. "I'll call you back," I said, and ended the conversation. For my 67th birthday, I planned something I'd never done before, a celebration that was actually about me. I chose an elegant steakhouse across town, the kind of place with cloth napkins and waitstaff who understood the value of quiet conversation. I invited 6 people who had earned their place through decades of mutual respect and genuine friendship. There was Carl, my former supervisor, who'd taught me that integrity matters more than popularity. Margaret, my estate attorney, who'd helped me navigate complex financial planning for years. Frank, a retired accountant who'd saved me from a major tax mistake back in 2009. Helen and George, neighbors who'd spent a weekend helping me repair storm damage to my roof without being asked. And finally, Janet, my late brother David's widow, who'd become a close friend and living connection to the person who'd understood me best. I sent handwritten invitations 3 weeks in advance. Not a single mention to Linda. No calendar reminders. No casual references to birthday plans. I left the house that evening wearing my best suit, told Linda I had an appointment, and drove away with nothing but my wallet and car keys. The dinner was exactly what I'd hoped for. Quiet conversation, genuine laughter, people who saw me as more than a financial resource or supporting character in someone else's drama. We were halfway through the main course when the disruption arrived. Marcus burst through the front door like he owned the place. Drunk, underdressed, reeking of whatever he'd been drinking mixed with cologne that couldn't quite mask the smell of desperation. He scanned the dining room, spotted me in the back corner booth, and marched over with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "You've got some nerve," he announced loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Having a birthday party and not inviting the woman who raised you like her own son. What's wrong with you?" I carefully folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. Margaret raised an eyebrow but continued eating calmly. Carl took another sip of wine like nothing unusual was happening. "Marcus," I said in a voice that didn't carry beyond our table, "you need to leave. This is a private dinner." "Private?" he spat. "You mean selfish. Mom is at home crying because her husband abandoned her on his birthday. These people don't even know you. We're your real family." I gestured subtly toward the bar, where the manager was already moving in our direction. In places like this, disruptions are handled quickly and discreetly. "Sir," the manager said to Marcus with professional politeness, "I'm going to need you to lower your voice or leave the premises." Marcus whirled around to face him. "Do you know who this man is? Do you know what kind of family he's destroying with his selfishness?" I stood up slowly. "Please escort him out. He's not part of my party and he's clearly intoxicated." "You can't kick me out on your birthday!" Marcus yelled as the manager firmly guided him toward the exit. "This isn't over, old man. You can't just pretend family doesn't exist." The entire scene lasted maybe 3 minutes. As soon as Marcus was gone, conversation resumed at our table like nothing had happened. These were people who understood that drama doesn't deserve an audience. "Friend of yours?" Frank asked with dry humor. "Former stepson," I replied, sitting back down. He's having a difficult adjustment period. 10 minutes later, Linda arrived. I could see her through the front windows, standing on the sidewalk in heels that were too high for her age, yelling my name like she was calling a lost dog. She pounded on the glass several times, demanding that I come outside and face the consequences of my selfishness. I raised my wine glass toward my companions. That, my friends, is the sound of First Place losing its audience. Gentle laughter rippled around the table. We finished our dinner while Linda eventually gave up and drove away, probably to console Marcus and plan their next emotional ambush. The courthouse hearing was scheduled for 8:30 a.m. on a Wednesday. I arrived not because I was required to attend, but because I wanted to witness the final act of this long-running drama. Courtroom 4B had that institutional smell I remembered from insurance fraud investigations. Stale air, fear, and the faint odor of disinfectant trying to mask human desperation. Linda sat in the third row wearing a black dress like she was attending a funeral. Maybe she thought it would generate sympathy from the judge. Her attorney, some silver-haired man who looked like he'd charged by the hour for false optimism, shuffled through papers with practiced indifference. Marcus was led in wearing Orange County jail attire, his hair slicked back with what was probably spit and determination. When he spotted me sitting calmly in the back row, his confident smirk faltered for just a moment. The judge entered and got straight to business. Docket number 47291, Marcus Chen. Multiple charges including DUI, destruction of public property, resisting arrest, and threatening a police officer. Linda's attorney stood up with theatrical confidence. Your Honor, my client's mother is prepared to secure bail using property owned jointly with her husband, Thomas Chen, who has historically provided financial support for the defendant and possesses substantial assets to guarantee compliance with court orders. The judge looked down at a document that had been filed weeks earlier. My legal revocation of any financial responsibility for Marcus Chen, dated and notarized, approved by the Court Administration Office after a thorough review process. Mr. Chen has filed documentation revoking any legal or financial responsibility for the defendant. This revocation predates today's hearing and complies with all statutory requirements. I watched Linda's face drain of color as the reality hit her. She turned in her seat to stare at me with an expression that cycled through disbelief, rage, and something approaching panic. Marcus said nothing, but his mouth opened and closed like he was trying to process information in a language he'd never learned. Alternative financial guarantor, the judge asked. None available at this time, Your Honor. Then the defendant remains in custody. Bail denied. Next case. The gavel came down with the finality of a door slamming shut. Linda made a strangled noise that was part sob, part gasp. It's okay, baby, she called out to Marcus as he was led away in handcuffs. I'll figure something out. We'll fix this. But Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at me with pure hatred, like I'd personally betrayed him instead of simply refusing to subsidize his consequences. I stood up, buttoned my coat, and walked toward the exit. Linda scrambled after me, her heels clicking frantically on the linoleum floor. Thomas, wait, you can't just leave him there. I didn't stop walking. I'd already heard everything she'd ever needed me to hear. The public rankings, the casual dismissals, the late-night conversations, where she'd reduced me to a supporting character in her maternal drama. The final text message I sent Linda was composed carefully and sent at 11:47 p.m. 3 days after the hearing. She'd left multiple voicemails, each one more desperate than the last, begging me to reconsider, promising things would be different, swearing she'd never meant to hurt me. I'd listened to every message, then deleted them without responding. But I wanted her to understand exactly why her world had collapsed so completely and precisely. The text was simple. You spent years telling everyone that Marcus was your number one priority. I never argued with that ranking. I just made sure you could live with your choice without subsidizing it with number two's resources. The message showed as delivered and read within minutes. Then my phone went silent. The next morning, Linda woke up in a house that technically belonged to a trust she didn't control, with bank accounts she couldn't access, surrounded by furniture and belongings that had never legally been hers. She found a printed photograph I'd left on the kitchen counter, the exact moment from Thanksgiving dinner when she'd raised her glass to toast Marcus while publicly demoting me to second place. I'd circled her face and hand with a red marker and written underneath in block letters, "Rankings have consequences. Enjoy first place." By the time she discovered the photo, I was already 3 states away, driving toward a cabin in Montana that my brother David had left me. A place where the only rankings that mattered were between coffee and silence, between morning and evening, between solitude and peace. Linda had spent 14 years building a hierarchy with herself and Marcus at the top, and me serving as their financial foundation. When that foundation quietly removed itself, their entire structure collapsed under its own weight. Marcus sits in county jail, learning that charm and entitlement don't qualify as legal tender. Linda sits in an empty house, discovering that emotional manipulation loses its power when the target stops participating in the game. And I sit by a mountain lake, finally understanding what my brother meant about letting loud people exhaust themselves while you hold on to the real power. The power to walk away, the power to choose who deserves your investment, the power to rank yourself first for the first time in decades. Sometimes the quietest revenge is simply refusing to remain where you're not valued. Sometimes the most devastating response to being ranked second is to remove yourself from the competition entirely.